Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, a sleepy summary. There is a man sitting alone at a writing desk somewhere at the edge of a military camp, and the camp is very far from Rome, and Rome feels like a dream that he only half remembers. The candles are burning low. Outside the tent, the wind moves across the Danube plain in long, slow waves, and the sound of it is like the sound of breathing, like something enormous and invisible is breathing over the whole world. And the man at the desk is Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, and he is not writing for you. He is writing for himself. He will never show these pages to anyone. He will wake up tomorrow and put on his imperial robes and make decisions about wars and laws and the deaths of men. And none of the people who bow to him will ever know that the night before he sat here in the dark and reminded himself, very quietly, not to be afraid of dying, and to be kind to the man who insulted him at dinner, and to remember that all the famous emperors before him are dust now, all of them, every single one, even the great ones, even Augustus. Even the ones whose names still echo in marble corridors, they are dust now, and the marble corridors will one day be dust too, and this is somehow a comfort, though it takes a while to understand why. He picks up his pen and he begins, and what he writes is not a philosophy treatise in the grand sense, not a carefully argued system with premises and conclusions and footnotes. It is something softer than that, something more like a murmur, like a man reminding himself of things he already knows but keeps forgetting. And we are allowed to listen, which is a kind of privilege, because what he is saying is very true and very gentle, and has the quality of thoughts that arrive just before sleep. When the noise of the world has faded, and what remains is only what matters. He writes about his teachers first. He writes about the things he learned from the people around him, from his grandfather, from his father, from his mother, from the men who shaped him when he was young and did not yet have the weight of an empire on his shoulders. From his grandfather Verus, he learned to be gentle and good-tempered. From his father, who died when Marcus was young, he learned modesty and manliness. From his mother, he learned to be religious and generous, to keep himself from evil-doing, and from her simplicity of living, he learned something about the difference between the life you need and the life you are told to want. From his great-grandfather, he learned to go to good teachers, and not to think that the school provided by the state was good enough. He lists these debts carefully, humbly, the way a man takes stock of a treasury not his own but entrusted to him, and there is something in the listing that is itself a practice of gratitude. A slow, deliberate acknowledgement that the self is not self-made, that every good quality he has came from somewhere, from someone, from the long chain of people who loved him or taught him or simply lived near him with grace and dignity. From Rusticus, one of his teachers in philosophy, he learned not to write treatises for public display. This is quietly funny or quietly poignant, depending on how you hold it, because here he is, writing exactly the kind of private notebook that Rusticus would have approved of, the kind that is not for show, the kind that is only honest because no one is supposed to read it. From Apollonius, he learned freedom of will and steadiness of purpose, and to be grateful for the time spent with a wise man. From Sextus, he learned a benevolent expression of face, which seems like a small thing until you realize what it means to go through an entire life with a benevolent expression of face, to be the person whose face, in repose, says, "I am not against you." He learned from one teacher not to be angry at fools, and from another not to be swayed by rhetoric, and from another to be careful and exact in practical matters. And from all of them together, through the long years of being taught and reading and sitting in silence and thinking, he assembled something that might be called a way of living, though he would not have been comfortable with such a grand description. He would have said only that he was trying, that he was still learning, that the work was never finished. And the work, as he understood it, had to do with three things primarily, and these three things weave through everything he writes. They are the threads that the whole long fabric is made of. The first is the question of what is in your control and what is not. The second is the question of how to treat other people. The third is the question of how to think about time and death. And he circles back to all three again and again, in different words, from different angles, the way you might circle back in a dream to a room you recognize without knowing why. What is in your control? He is very clear about this, or he is trying to be very clear, and sometimes you can feel the effort of the trying. The way clarity is not a thing you arrive at once and keep, but a thing you have to keep arriving at. What is in your control is your mind, your judgments, your impulses, your desires, your aversions, the way you respond to what happens to you. That is all. That is the whole list. Everything else, everything outside that list, is not in your control, and this means your reputation is not in your control, and your health is not in your control, and whether people like you is not in your control, and whether Rome falls is not in your control, and whether you die tomorrow or in 40 years is not in your control, and whether the people you love are safe is not in your control, and whether the harvest is good or the plague comes or the barbarians cross the border or the Senate respects you or your children outlive you, none of these things are in your control, and so you should not spend your soul's energy on them. You should spend your soul's energy on the one thing that is yours, which is how you meet what comes. He did not invent this idea. He learned it from the Stoics, and the Stoics got it from thinking very hard about the nature of things, and Marcus took it and turned it over in his hands and looked at it from every angle, and what he found was that it was not cold, the way it might sound at first. It was not a counsel of detachment or a reason to stop caring. It was, instead, a very practical kind of freedom. If you believe that your happiness depends on things outside your control, then you are never truly free, because the world can always take those things from you, and it frequently will, because the world is indifferent to your happiness in a way that is simply a fact about the world, not a judgment on you. But if you understand that your happiness, such as it is, depends only on the quality of your own thinking, your own character, the way you choose to respond to each moment, then nothing can take it from you, and this is a kind of freedom that no emperor can grant and no barbarian can take away. He writes this to himself because he needs to hear it. Because he is an emperor, and emperors are surrounded by people who want things from them, and people who flatter them, and people who fear them, and people who resent them, and people who plot against them. And in all of that noise, it is easy to forget what matters, easy to be drawn into caring about your reputation, caring about being remembered well, caring about whether the historians will be kind. And he keeps reminding himself, your reputation is not your business. Whether people praise you or blame you, whether they understand you or misunderstand you, whether they love you or hate you, none of this touches the part of you that is you, the rational soul, the part that chooses, the part that judges, the part that can look at any situation and ask simply, what is the right thing to do here? He writes about impressions. This is a technical Stoic idea, but he makes it feel intimate. When something happens to you, or when you see something, or when someone says something to you, before you respond, before you react, before you feel, there is a first impression, a kind of report from the senses arriving at the door of the mind. And you can choose, if you are practiced at it, to pause at the door, to not simply fling it open and let the impression rush in and take over, to say instead, let me look at this. Is this impression accurate? Is this actually as bad as it feels? Is this actually as good as it feels? What exactly is this thing that is happening? And when you slow down and look, you often find that the impression was a distortion, that the thing that seemed like a catastrophe is only a difficulty, that the thing that seemed like an insult is only a careless word, that the thing that seemed like a threat is only a fear in your own mind wearing the mask of something external. Do not let the impression rush in. This is harder than it sounds. This is, in fact, a lifelong practice, and Marcus knows it, which is why he keeps reminding himself. He is the emperor of the most powerful empire in the world, and he is sitting in a tent on the frontier, reminding himself not to let the impression rush in. And there is something very human in that, something that closes the distance of 2,000 years and makes him feel present in the room with you. He thinks about time in a way that is melancholy and beautiful in equal measure. He thinks about how everything is brief, how the present moment is the only moment there is, and it is already passing as you notice it. How the past is gone completely, and the future is not yet here and might not arrive at all. And so really there is only this breath, this thought, this small arc of now, and it is very small, and it is surrounded on all sides by an immensity of time that existed before you were born and will continue long after you are gone. And in that context, your particular worries and ambitions and fears are very small indeed. But he does not say this to make you feel insignificant. He says it to make you feel free. Because if all things are brief, if all things pass, if the emperors and the generals and the philosophers and the slaves all dissolve into the same forgetting, then the pressure is off, in a way. You do not have to be remembered. You do not have to build something that lasts forever. You do not have to impress anyone. You only have to do the right thing right now in this moment with the short time and limited energy you have been given, and then let it go, and then do the right thing again, and let that go too, and do this until you die, which will be soon, soon in the cosmic sense, soon in the sense that a single human life is barely a flicker against the backdrop of eternity. But it is your flicker, and you can make it burn as cleanly and as truly as you can. He is fond of thinking about famous men from history and noting that they are gone. Alexander the Great and his mule driver came to the same end. Augustus, who was worshipped as a god, and his court physicians, and his favorites, and the men who mourned him, all gone, all returned to the same earth. The names we know, the names carved in stone, the names that seem permanent, they are not permanent. Even the names we have forgotten were once spoken every day. And before them there were others whose names never survived at all, and before them others, and before them the unimaginable depth of time going back and back to something that has no shape we can picture. And after us the same. Our names, our works, our children's children's names, all will dissolve eventually. All will be forgotten. The river always flows. The torch always passes on. The flame is the same flame even in different hands. This is not despair, he insists, or he implies it, because he keeps returning to his duties after thinking these thoughts. He does not lie down, he does not abdicate. He puts on the robe and goes out and makes decisions and writes letters and sits in judgment and administers the empire, because that is what has been given to him to do, and the fact that it will all be forgotten does not make it meaningless. It makes it, if anything, simpler. Do it without attachment to the outcome. Do it because it is your duty, because it is the right use of this brief time, because the rational soul was made for action as surely as the eye was made for seeing, not for fame. Not for reward, not for gratitude, just for the doing because it is the right thing to do. He thinks about his nature and the nature of things. He is made of body and breath and mind, he says, and of these the body is only a vessel, and the breath belongs to the air and will return to it. And the mind, the ruling faculty, the little piece of the universal reason that animates him specifically, this is the thing to tend. The body will decay. He is quite matter-of-fact about this, in the way that someone who has lived close to death, as a general and as a man prone to illness, learns to be matter-of-fact about the body's fragility. The body is an animal. It has animal needs and animal ends. Treat it neither too harshly nor too indulgently. It is not you. You are the thing that watches the body with a kind of fond detachment, noting its hungers and its pains without being enslaved to them. The mind, though, the mind is where the work is. The mind is the only kingdom that is truly yours, and what he means by mind here is not intelligence, not the cleverness that solves problems or the wit that amuses people at dinner. He means something more like moral attention, the capacity to notice what is happening and ask what is right, the capacity to choose, the willingness to examine your own judgments and find them wanting and revise them, the willingness to say, I was wrong, the willingness to start again. He writes about virtue, and the word has become a little stiff in modern usage, a little preachy, but when he uses it, he means something living and practical. He means the four old Stoic virtues: wisdom, justice, courage, and self-control. And of these, the greatest is wisdom, because wisdom contains all the others. Wisdom knows what is truly good and what is only apparently good. Wisdom knows that pleasure is not good in itself, and pain is not evil in itself, and that what matters is only what is happening in your mind, in your choices, in your will. Justice is very close behind, because the practice of virtue is not solitary. It is always turned toward other people, toward the community, toward the whole, and justice is how wisdom expresses itself in relation to other human beings. He believes very deeply that human beings are made for each other. This surprises some people who read him expecting cold self-sufficiency, the philosopher alone on the mountain. But Marcus is not like that. He loves Rome. He loves humanity. He is moved by it. He says, what is harmful to the hive is harmful to the bee. He says, we are made for cooperation, like hands, like feet, like rows of the upper and lower teeth. He says, The first rule is to keep an untroubled spirit. The second is to look things in the face and know them for what they are. But threaded through both of these is a third thing that is harder to name, which is the love of the whole, the sense of belonging to something larger than yourself, the recognition that your good is not separate from the good of everyone around you. He is an emperor, and he is also a Stoic philosopher, and these two things create a very specific set of tensions, and he does not avoid them. He writes directly into them. He is required by his position to make decisions that affect millions of people. He is required to punish, to reward, to wage war, to levy taxes, to manage an empire that stretches from Scotland to Mesopotamia, and is always being pressed on from the outside and rotting from the inside, as all large things do. And he has to do all of this while also believing that external things do not matter, that fame does not matter, that power is not a good in itself, that the emperor and the slave are made of the same material and will come to the same end. He does not resolve this tension neatly. He just lives in it and keeps writing. He writes about anger. He writes about it the way someone writes about a thing they struggle with personally, with too much specificity to be theoretical. When someone does something wrong, he says, consider, what were they thinking? What did they believe was good? They were not evil for the sake of being evil. No one, he believes, does wrong intentionally in the full sense of intention. They do wrong because they are confused about what is good, because they believe that their anger or their greed or their fear is pointing them toward something worth having, and they are mistaken, and their mistake is pitiable rather than contemptible. The murderer thinks he is protecting something. The thief thinks he is providing for himself. The man who insulted you at dinner thought he was being clever or defending his dignity, or simply could not stop himself because he has not done the work of learning to pause at the door. And so, pity them, be patient with them, try to help them if you can without contempt, and if you cannot help them, at least do not be made worse by them. Do not let their confusion become your confusion. Do not let their anger light a fire in you that burns up your own peace. The person who wrongs you has power over you only if you choose to give it to them. And giving it to them helps no one, least of all you. He thinks about the men around him, the court, the flatterers and the schemers, and the ones who are simply trying to survive in proximity to power. He does not moralize much, or he does not sound like he is moralizing, because he is always addressing himself. He is not pointing at others and finding them wanting. He is reminding himself not to be like that, not to be swayed by flattery, not to mistake the performance of virtue for virtue itself, not to care too much about what others think or say or do. He is his own student perpetually, and his notes are his lessons. He has a practice that he recommends to himself in different forms throughout the book, which is the practice of looking at things clearly and describing them plainly, stripping away the words that inflate or diminish, seeing what is actually there. A purple robe is sheep's wool dyed with the blood of a shellfish. Wine is the juice of grapes. A roasted animal is a dead bird or a dead pig. A beautiful woman, her age advanced, is an old woman. He is not being cruel. He is being a kind of radical materialist of the imagination, trying to see past the way language decorates and distorts, the way desire and fear add a shimmer to things that makes them seem more or less than they are. When you see clearly, you make better choices. When you see the robe as sheep's wool rather than as imperial purple, you are less enslaved to it. When you see death as the natural completion of a biological process rather than as the great darkness, it is less frightening. He is not entirely convincing on death, or he is convincing in the way that someone who is still trying to convince himself is convincing, which is different. He says that death is nothing, that it is only the dissolution of the elements that were temporarily arranged into the thing we call Marcus Aurelius, and that the elements will be rearranged into other things, and that this is natural and fine. He says that Alexander the Great and his stable boy are both equally dead, equally returned to the common stuff of the universe. He says that to fear death is to fear a natural thing, and we do not fear the harvest, and we do not fear the evening when the day is done. He says these things, and then, a few pages later, says them again, slightly differently, which is the behavior of someone who has not quite settled the question, who is still working on it in the night, still trying to make peace with the darkness outside the tent. Maybe the peace is not fully possible. Maybe that is the honest thing. Maybe the reminder to not fear death, repeated so many times, is itself evidence that the fear keeps returning, that even for a philosopher-emperor, the animal body does not simply accept its own finitude on command. And there is something comforting in that, in the idea that even Marcus Aurelius, who had thought more carefully about death than almost anyone, still needed to remind himself not to be afraid of it. You are not alone in your fear. The fear is very old. It is as old as the first creature that knew it was going to die, which was a very long time ago, and the reminders have been necessary ever since. He thinks about the river of time and uses water images often. Everything flows. The same river and not the same river. The world is in constant transformation, and what seems permanent is not, and what seems like a fixed thing is only a pattern in the flow, and the pattern will dissolve, and the flow will continue, and new patterns will form, and this has been happening since before there was anyone to notice it, and will continue long after the last human mind has gone dark. He does not find this terrifying. He finds it in his quieter moments almost beautiful, the way you might find a very old and indifferent landscape beautiful, a desert or a glacier, something that has been here long before you and will be here long after, something that makes your smallness feel peaceful rather than terrible. He writes about the body's needs and says, "Give them what they need and no more." He was known for eating simply, for sleeping on a hard surface, for not spending much time on physical pleasures. He did not do this from hatred of the body or from a belief that physical pleasure was sinful, exactly, but from something more practical, a belief that the body, if you indulge it, begins to run things. It begins to set the agenda. You start living in service of its appetites rather than in service of your values, and this is a kind of slavery that the Emperor of Rome should be especially alert to, because the Emperor of Rome has more opportunities for indulgence than almost any human being who has ever lived, and the temptation is correspondingly larger. He was not always successful at this. He seems to say between the lines, which is why he keeps reminding himself. He writes about work, about action, about getting up in the morning. There is a famous passage where he imagines lying in bed and telling himself, "I am going to get up now to do the work of a human being." And the body protests, says, "Stay warm, stay comfortable, go back to sleep." And he answers, "But were you made for comfort? Were you made for lying in? Or were you made for activity, for the use of your reason, for the carrying out of your duties?" And the body has no good answer for this. Comfort is pleasant, but it is not a purpose. Warmth is nice, but it is not a reason to be alive. You were made for something. The question is whether you will do it. He does not romanticize the doing. He does not say that the work will always be rewarding, or that the duties will always be interesting, or that you will love every morning you drag yourself out of bed. He says only that it is the right thing to do, and that right things should be done, and that the discomfort of doing them is not a meaningful objection, because discomfort is a report from the body, and the body's reports are not the final word. He thinks about the social contract, about what it means to be a part of the human community. He is a Roman and he believes in Rome, but he also thinks beyond Rome, in the way that Stoic philosophy always pushed its practitioners to do. He thinks in terms of the whole human race, the city of rational beings, the community that has no walls because reason is everywhere and connects everything that can reason. He is a citizen of this larger city first and a Roman citizen second, and when these two commitments conflict, and sometimes they do, the larger one wins. The good of all rational beings is the purpose. Rome is only the instrument. This is a quietly radical thought for an emperor to have. He writes about justice and what it means to treat people fairly. He is speaking to himself about his own judicial power, about the weight of the decisions he makes, about how many lives depend on his judgments being clear and fair and not distorted by personal feeling. He reminds himself, you cannot know what is in another person's mind. You can only judge what they did and what the law says and what the situation requires. Do not add contempt to punishment. Do not enjoy the power you have over others. Do not confuse your personal distaste for someone with a legal judgment about them. These reminders suggest, as always, that the temptations he is resisting are real, that somewhere in himself there is a man who would like to be contemptuous, who sometimes enjoys the power a little, who sometimes confuses the personal and the judicial, and he is writing to keep that man in check. He thinks about providence, about whether the universe is ordered or random, and he is honest that he cannot be certain, and yet he finds that it matters less than you would think. If the universe is ordered by a rational providence, then everything that happens is for the best, and you should trust it and work within it. If the universe is only atoms combining and recombining with no purpose, then it is still the case that you have reason, and reason is the best guide you have, and you should use it. Either way, act rationally. Either way, do your duty. Either way, do not be afraid. The theology is less important than the ethics. What matters is how you live, not what story you tell about why the universe allows it. He writes about prayer, and his sense of prayer is unusual, gentle. He does not ask for specific things. He does not petition for victory or for health or for the survival of his children, though his children died, several of them died, and this must have been a grief almost too large to hold. He prays, if that is the word, for the capacity to receive what comes well, for the ability to use whatever is given, for freedom from fear and desire so that he can see clearly and act truly. This is a different kind of asking. It is not asking for the world to be other than it is. It is asking for the self to be equal to the world as it is. And this, he believes, is something that can actually be given, or at least something that can be practiced toward, which is almost the same thing. He mentions his own failures frequently, or he implies them. He writes about the person who wrongs you with such specificity that you understand he has been wronged, probably many times, probably by people he trusted. He writes about flattery with such wariness that you understand he has been flattered to the point of almost believing it. He writes about anger with such earnestness that you understand he knows anger from the inside, knows what it is to feel the heat of it rising in you, and to have to make a choice about whether to act on it. He is not a saint. He is a man trying very hard to be good, which is a different thing and arguably more interesting. He writes about philosophy itself, about what philosophy is for and what it is not for. It is not for display. It is not for producing impressive arguments. It is not for winning debates or building reputations as a thinker. It is for living. It is for the practical management of a human life in the direction of virtue. And if a philosophy cannot help you get up in the morning, cannot help you face the person who insulted you without contempt, cannot help you sit with the dying without terror, then what good is it? He has very little patience for abstract philosophy that does not translate into how you move through the day, and this is part of why reading him feels so immediate, so present, so much like being spoken to rather than being lectured at. He thinks about teachers and tyrants. He is the most powerful man in the world, in a certain sense, and he knows what power does to people. He has watched it do things to people around him, and he is quietly, persistently afraid of what it might do to him. He reminds himself of the Stoic teaching that the emperor and the slave are made of the same substance, that imperial purple is still just dyed wool, that the palace is just a building, and one day it will be rubble, and other buildings will stand where it stood, and people will not know what stood there before. He reminds himself that the great emperors of the past, the ones held up as models, are gone now, and who remembers the daily texture of their virtue or their vice? Who remembers the small kindnesses? Who remembers whether they were patient with their stewards or whether they were contemptuous of the servants? These things are gone, and so the question is not how you will be remembered, but how you are actually being, right now, today, in the small invisible moments that no historian will record. There is a tenderness in him that is easy to miss if you read too quickly. He writes about children and about the brevity of childhood, and about how the child you love grows into someone you do not quite recognize, and then grows old and dies, and the generations come and go like waves, and each wave thinks it is very important, and each wave turns out to be water. He writes about his wife, Faustina, who was by all historical accounts a complicated woman, and he writes about her with a kind of plain gratitude, listing her qualities as he listed the qualities of his teachers, and the listing itself is a form of love, the kind of love that pays attention, that notices. He is not demonstrative, he is a Stoic, but the attention is a form of love, and it is everywhere in the text, this careful noticing, this sustained looking. He writes about the present moment with an intensity that feels almost modern. Be here, he says, in different ways, not in the past, which is gone and fixed and cannot be changed, not in the future, which is not yet and may never be what you imagine. Here, this breath, this conversation, this food in front of you, this person asking you a question, this soldier in front of you awaiting judgment, This is where your life is. This is the only place your life can be. And the mind that keeps sliding into the past or racing toward the future is a mind that is missing its own life, is living somewhere other than where it actually is. He is suspicious of pleasure and pain in equal measure, not because he believes they should be ignored, but because he believes they are unreliable narrators. Pleasure tells you that something is good, but pleasure is wrong often. It leads you toward things that harm you. Pain tells you that something is bad, but pain is wrong too. It keeps you from things that would be good for you, like the physical pain of early morning rising, like the discomfort of telling someone a truth they do not want to hear. The Stoic does not eliminate feeling. The Stoic evaluates feeling, lets it speak its piece, and then asks, is this reliable? Is this pointing me in a direction I actually want to go? He writes about the short life of the very famous and about the gap between fame and reality. Croesus, the richest man of the ancient world, gone. All the great kings of Assyria and Persia and Greece, gone. The world they built, mostly rubble now or transformed beyond recognition. And after them Socrates and Diogenes and the great philosophers whose names we still say, also gone. And after them, he implies himself, also gone. The measure of a life is not how long it is remembered. The measure of a life is whether it was lived rightly, whether the person inside it was trying, whether the small daily choices were made toward virtue rather than away from it. By this measure, a completely unknown person who was kind and honest and courageous in small invisible ways might have lived a far better life than an emperor who was celebrated for centuries. He writes about nature, about how the natural thing is not shameful. Birth is natural, and death is natural, and illness is natural, and aging is natural. The body doing what bodies do is not something to be disgusted by or afraid of. The Stoics believed in living according to nature, and one part of this was accepting the natural processes of the body without flinching, without adding unnecessary suffering through resistance or disgust. What nature requires, give it. What nature takes, let it go. The grain that was harvested in autumn did not weep because it was no longer standing in the field. The tree that loses its leaves in winter does not grieve the summer. All things have their season. All things return to their source. He thinks about the fire that, in the Stoic cosmology, is the source and substance of everything, the divine fire of reason that animates the universe, and of which the human mind is a kind of fragment, a small piece of the universal intelligence temporarily contained in a particular body in a particular time. And when the body dies, the fragment returns to the source, is absorbed back into the fire, and this is not loss but homecoming, or so he tries to believe, or so he finds himself believing when he thinks most clearly. The fire goes on. The pattern that was Marcus Aurelius will dissolve, but the fire from which the pattern was made will continue, will make new patterns, will warm new worlds. He has a recurring concern about wasted time, about the moments and hours that are spent in trivial distractions, in gossip, in entertainment, in the performance of busyness without actual work. He is not a joyless person. He does not condemn rest or leisure, but he is alert to the way time slips away, the way a life can be mostly spent on nothing in particular, and he keeps reminding himself that time is the one truly irreplaceable thing, that the money and the power and the reputation can be recovered if lost, but the hour that has passed absolutely and will never return. And this is both obvious and something that needs to be said again and again because we keep forgetting it. He writes about the importance of saying what you mean and meaning what you say. He distrusts elaborate rhetoric, distrusts the kind of language that is designed to impress rather than to communicate, and this distrust shows in his own writing, which is plain and direct and occasionally clumsy in a way that feels honest, like someone feeling for the word that actually fits rather than the word that sounds right. He does not show off. For a man of his intelligence and education and position, the restraint is remarkable, and it is a kind of virtue in itself, the virtue of not needing to be seen to be smart, of not using words to construct a performance of oneself. He thinks about his own position, the strange and heavy thing of being emperor, and the temptations peculiar to it. The temptation to think that imperial wealth is truly wealth. The temptation to think that imperial power is truly power. The temptation to believe the flattery. The temptation to mistake the performance of respect for genuine relationship. He has been surrounded since childhood by people who had reasons to please him, and this means he has had to work very hard to know what is true, to find the actual face of things beneath the face that has been arranged for him to see. And he knows that he has not always succeeded, that some of the false things have gotten through, and he writes to try to sort them out. He writes about the rational soul and its kinship with the reason that runs through all things. This is the most metaphysical part of his thinking, the part that requires the most from the reader, and he does not press it hard. He approaches it gently, as if he is not entirely sure of it himself, but finds it useful, finds that thinking of himself as a small node in a vast rational network helps him to feel both humble and connected. Humble because the network is so large and his piece of it so small. Connected because the same reason that moves through him moves through every other human being, and this means that the stranger is not entirely strange, the enemy is not entirely enemy, the man who wronged you shares with you the most important thing you have. He writes near the end, or toward what feels like an end, though the book has no real ending, about the life lived according to nature, according to reason, according to the good of the whole. He does not claim to have achieved this. He claims only to be trying, which is all he has ever claimed, which is the only thing he could honestly say. The trying is the thing, the daily return to the attempt, the willingness to be wrong and to revise. The patience with yourself that is not complacency, but is the necessary condition for continuing to try at all. If you demand perfection of yourself, you will stop trying when you fail, and you will fail. And so the demand for perfection is itself an obstacle to virtue. What is required is only the continued willingness to begin again. The candle has burned very low. The wind over the Danube plain has gentled, or he has stopped hearing it. Somewhere outside the tent, the legions are sleeping in their rows, soldiers who will wake before dawn and resume the long work of holding the edges of an empire that is, though he does not know it fully, already beginning its long decline. He does not know how much longer he has. A few more years, as it will turn out. The plague has already passed through Rome and his armies. His son Commodus is already alive and already, in ways Marcus cannot fully see, already becoming the man he will be, which is not the man Marcus hoped for. All the work of a life of philosophy, the notes in the notebook, the daily practice of virtue and attention, and the sun will undo much of it, will be exactly the kind of Emperor Marcus most feared being. There is no guarantee. There is no inheritance of wisdom. Every generation has to learn it again, each person alone at their desk in the dark, each person doing the work of trying to be good with whatever time they have. He sets down the pen. The book will be found after his death and copied and read for centuries, which is the last thing he wanted or expected or asked for, and if he could know it, he would probably say, "But I told you not to expect to be remembered. I told you that." And then, perhaps, he would be a little glad, despite himself, because he was human after all, and the human desire to be understood is very hard to extinguish, even in a Stoic philosopher-emperor sitting at a desk on the Danube, telling himself for the 100th time that it doesn't matter. It matters to us, though. It matters that he wrote it down. It matters that somewhere a tired and serious man, carrying more weight than anyone should carry, found time in the dark to be honest with himself, to remind himself to be kind, to be just, to be patient, to be present, to not be afraid, to let go, to try again tomorrow. It matters because we are still trying to learn the same things, sitting in our own private darknesses, making our own small lists of what we owe to the people around us and what we owe to ourselves, and what it means to live a life that, whatever its length and whatever its outcome, was genuinely attempted. The legions sleep. The river moves. The stars are as indifferent and as beautiful as they have always been. The notebook is closed for tonight. Tomorrow he will open it again. And somewhere in the long quiet of the night, if you listen very carefully, you can almost hear him, breathing slowly, trying to believe what he knows to be true, trying to be equal to the life he has been given, trying one more time to let go of the things that cannot be held, and to hold fast to the only thing that can be, which is the quality of his own attention, the direction of his own will, the small and private and irreducible fact of his own trying. This is the whole of the meditations, really. This is all it is and all it needs to be, a man trying in the dark to be good, reminding himself why, beginning again and again and again, until he doesn't have to anymore, and the river carries everything away, gently, the way rivers do, the way everything does in the end, in the great quiet that is both the end of all things and, somehow, a rest. SHHH. The pages are turning on their own now. The words are getting softer. The river is very slow and very wide and very dark, and it is carrying everything, all of it, every emperor and every slave, every triumph and every sorrow, every careful note made by candlelight, every reminder to be kind, every failed attempt and every small success, all of it downstream, all of it into the dark, all of it home. Sleep now.